Hello, good afternoon. My name is George Heslin and I serve as Executive Director here at New York Irish Centre. On behalf of the staff and the Board of Directors, I would like to welcome you to the American Ireland Youth Conference 2023, Creating Waves. In creating this conference, I would like to thank the Irish Government and the Northern Ireland Bureau for their kind support. I would also like to thank our media partner, Irish Central. I would like to thank the conference producers, Hannah Cecil and Ryan McNally. I would also like to welcome students from 12 universities on both sides of the Atlantic, and to thank our moderators who have given their time to this excellent conference. You're very welcome to this 3-day event. Please enjoy, and I would now like to welcome Irish Consul General from New York, Ms. Helena Nolan.
Good morning and welcome to everyone participating in this second annual America-Ireland Youth Conference 2023, Creating Waves. My name is Helena Nolan. I'm the Consul General of Ireland here in New York, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this very special event. I've reviewed your programme and I'm struck by the thoughtfulness that's gone into the selection of these vital topics and timely issues. None of these challenges are going to be resolved easily or quickly. Only by listening to all perspectives and by sharing best practices will we arrive at impactful responses. And that's where your participation comes in. You're gathered for this conference because of your exceptional expertise and insights. As advocates, educators and policymakers, you're all undertaking important work to identify and promote effective solutions to these challenges. This America-Ireland Youth Conference offers the hope of synergy, the potential to multiply the impact of your efforts by sharing your experiences and by learning from one another. This weekend is also about connecting people to one another to form partnerships and friendships that will endure well beyond this conference. So we count on you as young leaders to build on the transatlantic partnership between Ireland and the United States at this pivotal moment. I'd like to especially acknowledge George Heslin for his vision in first organising this event 1 year ago and for spearheading it into its second year, and Ryan McNally for his role as the conference's producer. Thank you. I wish you all the best of luck in your efforts and your work this weekend, and I want to thank all those involved in making this year's America-Ireland Youth Conference a reality. Buin sult as an occord speisialta seo. Gur míle maith agaibh.
I'm Andrew Elliott, Director of the Northern Ireland Bureau here in Washington, D.C., sending greetings to all of you that are involved in the America-Ireland Youth Conference 2023. What a fantastic event, what a great opportunity it is to connect across the Atlantic, and I was so pleased to see many of the Bureau's partner organisations involved: Queen's University Belfast, Ulster University, the Washington Ireland programme, Mitchell Scholars and many more. Fantastic to be able to support this event alongside the Government of Ireland and other supporters, and wish everyone well as you debate and discuss all the really interesting issues, such as the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, reproductive rights and climate change. Have a great time, everyone. Enjoy.
Welcome to Day 2 of the second annual American Ireland Youth Conference, Creating Waves. We are your conference coordinators, Brian McNally
and Hannah Cecil. This weekend, our young panelists will be tackling urgent global topics. Today's panel discussion is 25 years on from the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement. What's next?
This past April marked the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. The agreement was overwhelmingly endorsed by the people of Ireland, North and South, in the 2 referendums finally bringing the over 30-year violent conflict known as the Troubles to an end.
The United States played a key role in the passing of the agreement, with Special U.S. Envoy, former Secretary George Mitchell, chairing the multi-party peace talks.
The agreement allowed communities to begin the long journey of peace and reconciliation, to bring hope to future generations. Though the majority of the violence has ended, political and community tensions between nationalists and unionists still remain a part of the fabric of Northern Ireland.
Here to moderate today's panel is one of Northern Ireland's most recognizable print and broadcast journalists, Lynette Fay.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynette Fay, and I'm delighted to chair today's discussion as part of the Creating Waves conference, forging relationships between young people on both sides of the Atlantic. And over the next 90 minutes, the panelists will offer insight and perspectives, learnings and ambition around what's next after the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. I work in media, so I see my role here today as a social commentator and someone also who was born in County Tyrone. I live currently in Belfast and have done for the last 22 years. I went to college in Galway. I've worked in an advisory capacity with a university in the Republic of Ireland, and I was a member of the Future of Media Commission recently as well. So I have a broad understanding of life on the island. Maidir leis an play inniu tá seanachil sa Gaelic Mullinoige agus Tuckishe, a lovely proverb in the Irish language, I think sums up what we're doing here today. Mullinoige agus Tuckishe means praise the youth and they will come. So it is wonderful to give a platform like this to young people and their ideas and their critical thinking. When I think, though, I was 20 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. I didn't give the future any thought at all. Certainly didn't weigh up what the next 25 years might mean for life here, socially, politically, culturally, civically. And I'm very, very interested to hear from our young panelists today about what they think might happen here or what needs to happen over the next 25 years and why they are so interested in this subject and how society here in the north of Ireland works. So let's meet our panelists. First up, we have Ryan Connor. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Lynette. It's good to see you. And thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us today. To give you a brief introduction, my name is Ryan Connor. I recently completed a master's in European Studies at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And I wrote my master's thesis on the Northern Ireland peace process, and in particular, the human rights provisions in the Good Friday Agreement, and sort of how some have been implemented, some have not been implemented, and how sort of the negotiation and implementation process have dealt with the human rights abuses committed during the Troubles. So excited to be here and very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and we look forward to your contribution. Next up, we go to Belfast and Emma Murphy. Hello, Emma. Welcome.
Hi, Lynette. Yeah, it's a lovely sunny evening here in Belfast as well, so it feels sad to be indoors. But yeah, really delighted to be part of this panel. Speaking as a young person that's been born and bred in Belfast my whole life. I'm also the president of Queen's Students' Union here. And I kind of talk to and advocate on behalf of young people on a daily basis. So I think that I have a great interest in the past, kind of the past events that have been happening over the past few months here, and the focus the North is getting. So really excited to be speaking to other people in here and their perspectives as well.
Well, we look forward to hearing yours, Emma. Thank you. Next up, he's eager to get involved in the discussion there. We welcome Kevin O'Connor down in Cork. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, my name is Kevin O'Connor. I'm a recent history and politics graduate from UCC University College Cork. My focus in my degree was on international relations, and in particular in transatlantic relations, so American and European relations. However, I have a particular interest in the north of Ireland. I would have family up in the north in Carrickfergus, and also I did several modules on the Northern Ireland peace process and the history of Northern Ireland as well. And I look forward to the discussion today. I know it's going to be fantastic.
Lovely, Kevin. Thank you very much. And finally, our last panelist today, please welcome Rachel Stromsta. Hello, Rachel. You're very welcome.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. My name is Rachel. I'm a young professional. I'm currently based in Washington, D.C. and focused on democratic governance and human rights. Currently, I'm working as a program officer with the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, but I am just speaking in my personal capacity. I also hold a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science with a concentration in human rights from Macalester College. I have experience living, working, and studying at an International Conflict Research Institute affiliated program at Ulster University, which was based in Derry and had a concentration in democracy and social change, which I focused on community work and reconciliation. I worked with children in Crossfire, and I'm excited to be talking about my experience with that, and also initiatives with civic education and other aspects that I'm interested in going into farther. Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing from you, Rachel, as the discussion progresses. Thanks very much. So welcome to Ryan, Emma, Kevin and Rachel, and to everyone else who's watching as well. If you do want to let us know where you are watching and why you are interested in this subject, we'd love to hear from you. You can just send us a message on chat today if you like. So given the varying interests of all our panelists, we're trying to cover an awful lot of ground in a short space of time. So we're going to talk about the present, how Northern Ireland looks and feels to the person who lives here, also to the person from the outside looking in, what it's like. We'll of course look to the future, but in order to understand where you're going, you must first understand where you've come from. So we're going to go back to 1998 and the 10th of April and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And Emma, as you mentioned in your introduction, Emma Murphy, you're very interested in that historical aspect of things. Recently, Queen's University Belfast hosted a huge international conference marking the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. All the key players who are still alive were present. It was a who's who. It was quite incredible what was achieved. But as someone who was asked to introduce Hillary Clinton and Senator George Mitchell onto the stage at that conference, what did you get from being part of that 25 years on?
It's a really good question. I think that from my perspective, it was very surreal in a way. In a lot of ways, I kind of still feel like a normal kind of girl that's grown up in Belfast, and I was on a stage with very important political players. But I think that it kind of brought the attention to young people as well. I think that, again, kind of the focus was very much on political players of the past, which is definitely right to celebrate that. But I think it was worthwhile having a voice of kind of someone that was born just after the signing of the agreement to kind of also have their voice as part of that. So I think that the topics that I was kind of covering in my speech was around the cost of living crisis that young people here are currently facing, the fact that, you know, a lot of the key institutions and the executive aren't up and functioning at the moment. It's kind of drawn attention to those kind of current issues that young people are facing today. But at the same time, I think that for me, it's something I'll always remember. I think that specifically George Mitchell's speech was probably the best speech I've ever borne witness to, never mind had to kind of not act too emotional on stage with so many people watching. But I think it's been a year of events that definitely have had a commemorative tone, which is very appropriate, but I think that there definitely could be more done to bring focus to the present and the future as well. So that's why I was so keen to take part in panels like these as well.
And from your perspective, at that conference in Queen's, I'm sure it was a pinch me moment to be on stage with all those people, and especially introducing the likes of Hillary Clinton and Senator George Mitchell onto stage. But when you then look at the reality of what you're dealing with every day in the SU and the Student Union, we'll get to that a wee bit later. We'll talk about the political impasse that there is here at the minute and how that is directly affecting people on the ground. But historically, though, Emma, when you have studied the Good Friday Agreement, you said you were born just after it. You know, what aspects of that time, of those negotiations, stand out to you?
I think that from my perspective, again, having gone through the education system here, I think that it's been a recent thing for me to kind of undergo the actual learning of what all the different negotiations were, what happened during them. I think that for a lot of different young people, just going through secondary school and the likes of that, if you're not studying history to GCSE or A level, it's easy enough to miss out some of the key aspects of how the Good Friday Agreement actually came about. I think that it's something that it's quite difficult, especially with segregated education up here, for teachers to present the kind of topic in an appropriate way. I don't think that there's quite a lot of guidance at that lower level. I think that a lot of it is geared towards GCSE and A-level students that are a bit older. But if you don't study those subjects, I think that some students would then miss out on an understanding of some of the really big people that were involved. I think that it's only been recently that there's been more tribute being paid towards the likes of the Women's Coalition, the likes of Momolam, those kind of smaller political parties at the time that are no longer either running or putting candidates up. I think that it's something that it's only been through me having a really keen interest in reading a lot more about it and going to the likes of plays that have been put on recently, that I've gotten a better understanding of everything myself. So I think that it's definitely, some of it has been lost to time, but I think that having that focus then of the kind of very specific events of it have been just good for young people as well to kind of gain that experience otherwise, because I think that so much of how things have been framed in the past and the Troubles have been shaped by parents and family compared to society and education.
Okay, and just briefly, Emma, do you think that teaching students in schools, all schools, about the Good Friday Agreement, is that something that should be done here going forward?
I think so. I think it's the only way to start to get a grip on some of the legacy issues that are coming out as well. I know that as kind of part of this year in the 25th anniversary, that the Northern Ireland office have kind of offered reading materials and pamphlets to school children across the UK. But I think that having it at even the younger age, I remember in primary school, a lot of the history that we were learning about was the likes of World War II and other things that were slightly more removed from Northern Ireland compared to the likes of things that have actually happened in this country, in this place. So I think that just having a nuanced discussion as early as possible just kind of helps people to just get a better understanding themselves of where they are, where they come from, what their culture is as well.
Yeah, that's that broad understanding and as you say, reading materials available, but possibly if it's not part of the curriculum, I'm feeling that's what you're saying, that it should be formalized in some way, and not left to possibly the interest of a teacher in order for that to be, or depend on the interest of a teacher for it to be taught in school. Rachel, I know that you're interested in and you're interested in democracy and how democracy works, the role of women and the importance of women to peace processes across the world is something that you're very interested in. Emma has mentioned some of the key negotiators of the Good Friday Agreement. Emma also mentioned in passing that excellent play that was in the Lyric Theatre called Agreement, and the character of Mo Molam really was a standout performance in that particular play and brought her contribution really to the forefront, I thought, of the performance as well. But we had Mo Molam, the Women's Coalition. You know, how key were their contributions to the Good Friday Agreement in your opinion, Rachel? What difference did the women make?
Yeah, thanks so much, and happy to be here and glad this important subject is being touched on. Before I get into that as well, we have also in the US a recent exhibit called Peace Heroines, which is actually about the important part of women in the peace process in New York. And so it's really exciting to see women getting the recognition on a global scale who are such a vital part of the peace accords and the agreement. But yeah, I can talk a bit about the importance of these multiple women, Mo Molam, and then also the Women's Coalition. I think the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition was established as a key part of that peace process, and it was really driven from women and the grassroots. Often the women who joined the coalition were able to actually go across some of the divisions between Catholic or Protestant and identity divisions to mobilize in that way. And I think that's the first really important factor that the Women's Coalition brought. and other women peace builders additionally. And I think a key part of the Good Friday Agreement was around inclusion and bridging different identities. And I think that really made a huge difference as well. And I think also around the Women's Coalition, it was framed a lot around women wanting to participate in politics and wanting to be given a right and a figure to participate in their democracy and the institutions that matter to them. And so I think it really brought different identities across the aisle additionally. And it led to securing language in the agreement that specifically referenced rights of victims or providing reintegration for political prisoners, education, and otherwise. So it was a key factor as well for that aspect. And I think Mo Molan, as the key player with Secretary General, she was able to forge those relationships across key political party actors as well, and was focused a lot on solutions as well around the Good Friday Agreement. So I think that was key in the negotiations additionally.
It seems there's a very practical element brought by the women, the negotiating table. Kevin, another aspect of 1998 and why it happened was the US and the US involvement, the Clinton administration being involved. That was heavily celebrated here in Belfast, particularly at the Queen's Conference there a few weeks ago. As we've seen in recent months with these commemorations and discourse, and particularly with President Biden's visit as well, that interest from the United States continues. So what are your thoughts, first of all, on the role of the US and the Good Friday negotiations?
Well, first of all, I suppose the first thing I would bring up would be where the USA was at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. This was a time just after the Cold War, just before the September 11 attacks, the golden period for American diplomacy. You see America working in Yugoslavia, you see it working all across the globe for peace. North of Ireland is no different in that regard. However, I suppose what is interesting about it is that the North of Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, was a country that was said to have a special relationship with the United States, and yet there was violence happening in the North. However, the fact that it was not distracted elsewhere in the world allowed for it to go into the North and to help the peace negotiations to reach their fullest effect. It probably would have happened without the Americans eventually, but it would have taken a long time. And it just, with the Americans, it helped cement the deal. However, nowadays, especially with President Joe Biden, you see certain aspects of people in the North of Ireland who seem to see him as a biased actor. There's no doubt that he is quite in favour of the Republic of Ireland, and some people in the North see it as a bias factor in the ways that Clinton and others weren't. So it is interesting. It will be interesting to see how it evolves over time as well.
And what do you think the possibilities are there for that evolution over time? Do you think that relationship will remain?
I would hope it will remain. I suppose my focus for my thesis was on the Trump administration and its relations with Europe. Now, Trump was a complete shift, complete divergence from the normal US politics in a form of neo isolationism. However, that voice hasn't gone away. There is a certain level of bipartisanship when it comes to Ireland in issues that in America you do not see the likes of on other issues. However, there are certain figures within the US who say, "Oh, America first, America first," and maybe if there's America first, then there isn't such a good view on other parts of the world. But hopefully, and we have seen with President Biden, with other people, with other Democratic and Republican candidates, that they are effective in vouching for the Irish position, regardless on which side they're in.
Let's hear from our American panelists on that subject, about this interest, this special relationship with Ireland. the involvement with the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. Ryan, have you anything to add there about US involvement?
Yeah, Kevin, you made a lot of very good points about the American dimension, and you certainly can't talk about sort of the peace process without talking about the United States, and in particular, I picked up on that phrase you mentioned, that the 1990s were a quote unquote golden period of American diplomacy. United States was more or less the undisputed global power. It had more influence than really any other country had possibly ever had, and I think a lot of that is the reason why American foreign policy in places like Northern Ireland in the 90s was arguably so successful, so influential. I think now bringing that up to the present, 25 years later, the United States still has certainly still has a lot of influence in Northern Ireland, but it's no longer the 1990s, and around the world, the United States does not have nearly as much influence as it used to. So certainly still very powerful, still very influential, but not as much as it did 25 years ago. And so I think that's why sort of in recent years, especially after Brexit, despite pressure from the United States, the European Union, the Irish government, the British government has really acted in unilateral fashion, sort of which has put considerable strain and pressure on the Northern Irish peace process. So I think that shift in American power over the past 25 years has made a difference, and has had real consequences for places like Northern Ireland.
So go looking forward, and we will get to Brexit in more detail later, Ryan. But it has shifted the goalposts considerably in where the legacy of the Good Friday Agreement is concerned. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'd say over the past few years, members of Congress, members of the administration have repeatedly called on the British government to uphold commitments that it specifically on human rights, to uphold commitments it made in the Good Friday Agreement, and I think because of that, because of these shifts over the past 25 years, the U.S. certainly still is influential. What it says certainly matters, but not in the same way that it used to at the time of the negotiations in the 1990s.
And concerning human rights, Ryan, I know that you have specialized in this particular area of the Good Friday Peace Agreement. There is a chapter of the Good Friday Agreement addressing human rights and how they should be approached. So why did you want to specialize in this area?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there are several reasons. First is that I had previously written about sort of the civil rights movement, Bloody Sunday, in the sort of the late 1960s and early 1970s, and so sort of was interested in the onset of the Troubles and human rights abuses that were committed throughout the conflict. And when I was looking for a particular angle for my master's thesis, I was interested in looking at bringing it up to the present, looking at the peace process, and became very interested in particular in the relationship between peace and justice, and how peace agreements, they contain bargains, compromises, whatever you want to call them, that address in say, for example, the human rights issues, the agreement addresses them in part, but not in full. And so I found it a fascinating and underexplored aspect of the peace process.
Okay, well, it's very much in the public eye at the moment with the legacy bill that's moving its way through the House of Lords at the moment. And that's a bill which victims from both sides have come together and cohesively presented a united front and criticised. So what are your thoughts going forward on the implementation or lack thereof of the human rights provision of the Good Friday Agreement?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it remains a timely issue because of that. You know, the legacy bill, the so-called British Bill of Rights bill to overturn repeal the Human Rights Act. Yeah, it's from what I've heard from talking with others who have close knowledge of the situation. It seems very likely that the legacy bill will pass. You know, all of the political parties where they in Northern Ireland where they agree on very little else are all commonly opposed to the legacy legislation. And so I think, you know, going forward, given that it very likely will pass, I mean the United States, again, members of Congress have raised the issue. You know, the European Union, Council of Europe, so on and so forth. Irish government, but again, the British government is responding to its domestic political incentives, and so ultimately, as long as the current political party remains in power in Britain, I think that you know, we won't really see any changes as far as legacy, unfortunately.
It's very, very complex and ongoing. And I suppose a lot of those groups who are unified in their criticism are community groups, they are victims groups. Rachel, that brings me to you and the work you have done with community groups here. Very interested in just to first establish your background and interest in the Good Friday Agreement, Rachel.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to share a bit about that. As I mentioned briefly in my bio, I have experience living in Northern Ireland. I studied at an International Conflict Research Institute affiliated study away program based in Derry for the majority of the time. And it was focused on a lot of, as you're mentioning, the grassroots social change and reconciliation, civil society initiatives that came out of the peace process and have been continuing in the 25 years since as well. And so through that semester, I actually had an opportunity to work for one of them, Children in Crossfire, which is works on both a global element, addressing global injustices around health, poverty, and inequality. But there's also a component that focuses on global citizenship education and educating from the heart at the local level. And so I had an opportunity to help assist with some of the workshops for teachers and students around that aspect. During my research too, I focused a lot on community perceptions of reconciliation, which really only strengthened, I think, my interest in what's happened since the Good Friday Agreement in terms of at the community level, especially with these groups. Often I think civil society, churches, women's groups are in a very unique place in Northern Ireland from what my experience living there and otherwise, and having a chance to work for one of them too, is a really unique network at the grassroots level, being able to connect at the community level where other actors might not be able to. So I think there are a lot of really interesting dynamics too. I think community initiatives really span in terms of topics. Some are really focused on dealing with the past, and then others are on the more social initiatives, and some are even around engaging women in politics too, which I can touch on more later additionally, and others are focused on the education component and the global level.
Oh, and were you surprised that there were so many community groups working over so many different spheres of society, of life, and contributing? Almost all of them doing it on a voluntary basis. There's some funding involved, but there's an awful lot of goodwill involved in that type of work as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a really important point with funding. I think a big, a short caveat on my end, and then I'll get into my initial reactions, whether I was surprised. But I think a big trend has been post the Good Friday Agreement, there's been dwindling resources and a lack of funding too for many of these really strong and important initiatives. And so I think that's a huge element that's kind of framed the capacity through and it's been really encouraging for me, at least, to see the kind of robustness of civil society in that domain, despite all of the funding challenges. And so for me, I think I definitely was surprised when I first came to Northern Ireland to visit and live, that there were so many grassroots organizations spanning without any funding, at least at the beginning, and also really and I think that's a factor, and I think it kind of explains too some of the community commitment to reconciliation at that level too. It was really, I think, a bottom-up process.
I have a question from Trevor in New York. I'm going to get to it in a minute, Trevor, so just bear with me. But Emma, I just wanted to bring you in on that, on the community groups and community work. As someone who lives in Belfast, do you see it? And I suppose you do see it every day with the Students' Union. That's exactly what you do, the Students' Union. It is a type of community work within the university. What are your thoughts on community work, as being a very important part of the fabric of society here?
Yeah, it can't be stressed enough, because I think that there's so many different initiatives, programs that I'm aware of that people rely on here so heavily. And I think that especially within the past few months, the way that the funding model has kind of been announced by the Conservative government, kind of put in place by the Secretary of State at the moment, there just seems to be cut after cut coming through. And because the executive isn't up and running at the moment, they kind of are in this position where the budgets of Northern Ireland are now being set by the UK government instead of our own executive. So it just means that so many of the different initiatives for kind of education and different groups I've heard kind of have had to model different funding cuts right across the entire sector. In universities, they've been asked to model if they would get cuts of 20% off, like next year, how that would affect them. Just so many different arts initiatives, all of these different areas of society which are just so enriching, that are again kind of underfunded compared to the rest of the UK, the Republic of Ireland as well, that it just seems to be a position that is worsening daily. And I think that it's really disappointing. I think that as a young person from here, you kind of see how both in the north and in the south, there does tend to be a lot of migration for young people searching for better job opportunities, better education. And if we're offering less and less to keep young people here, and to have a quality of life here that is worth engaging with, it just seems to be that a generation then will be lost, where they might have different initiatives that they'll be able to participate in at even a secondary school level. But I think that more and more, a lot of the different sectors in the public sector are going to be facing quite difficult decisions with less and less resources available to them.
It's a very important point, and yet again, the political impasse here has been mentioned as part of the discussion. It is an important part of it, and we'll get to it in more detail shortly. I have a question, as I mentioned, from Trevor, and it is about Irish America and what can Irish America do to help keep the peace and balance of rights in both communities. I'm feeling this is a question for Kevin or Ryan. Kevin has unmuted himself. Yes, Kevin's trying to get in there. Okay, Kevin, what are your thoughts on that one?
I suppose Irish America is such a huge part in America. I mean, there's currently an Irish American president, but also like Irish America, there's roughly 40 million Americans, I believe, who claim ancestry in Ireland. That's a large lobbying group. I know lobbying is certainly individual groups lobbying in America is not as powerful anymore as it was in terms of different groups such as, you know, immigrants who came to America. However, it's still important, and what one must remember is that the Senate has the final say when it comes to a lot of foreign relations stuff, and that's more on an individual level, individual state level, where people can lobby their own senators to say that, look, we're still in favor of peace in Northern Ireland. That hasn't changed, you know, and that's extremely important if you have people in the White House who are not as experienced in those issues as well.
So you think Irish America still has a role to play in keeping the peace and balancing human rights in communities in Northern Ireland?
The minute they stop talking about it is the minute they get forgotten about.
Okay, Ryan, do you want to come in on that? Interesting as well that Kevin is saying that the Irish American lobby is extremely powerful. Some would say it's not as powerful as it once was. What are your thoughts on that? On the role of Irish America in keeping the peace?
Yeah, I will. Well, to briefly add to what Kevin has said, I agree with the point you just made, Lynette, about the Irish America not being as politically influential as it was, say, in the 50s or 60s. Kevin brought up a good point about sort of, you know, members of Congress, voters, sort of can continue talking about these issues, can raise awareness, can explain why they're important, but ultimately, going back to a point I made earlier, in that ultimately when it comes to, you know, the human rights commitments in the Good Friday Agreement, for example, the British government is responding to its domestic political incentives, and so, you know, while Congress, the administration, can raise awareness, can raise the issue in meetings with members of the British government, for example, there's only it's important to look at the big picture and to realize that there's only so much that you know, Irish America or people with an affinity for Ireland can do on this front.
Great points made, and I think that's going to take us to the political impasse and Brexit. But before we get to that, just hello to Hannah Uma, who's watching in Chicago, ready to learn more about the subject. Well, there's a lot to learn from these great contributions today, Hannah. And then if anyone else wants to send us a question, you can do. We're heading towards 6:45 here in Belfast, so that'll be 1:45 stateside. So we've got about 40 minutes left on the discussion. If we get that far, we may not, but then I'm going to open the can of worms. It is Brexit, so that could keep us to midnight, let's face it. So who wants to start to talk about Brexit? Because 10 years ago, Britain exiting the EU was not something that was discussed broadly. It was always there, rumbling along in the background, and then it felt like all of a sudden, oh my goodness, it happened one morning in June, where there we were. Here we are in 2023. And it would appear that Brexit has changed many aspects of life, very few aspects of life it hasn't touched. My friend was talking to me the other day that her house has turned into a post office because just parcels being delivered there for friends who live in the Republic of Ireland because they can't post things directly from the UK anymore, or it's too expensive. I see Kevin nodding his head there saying, yeah, he's not ordering parcels anymore from the UK. But joking aside, Emma, can you see Brexit impacting on your life on a daily basis, day to day?
I was struggling to unmute there. I think that it's one of those things that, like you're saying, there is kind of those small day-to-day impacts of, I remember whenever it kind of came into effect, you would suddenly see different things in your kind of grocery aisles, and it's those kind of like trade relationships that have completely changed seemingly overnight. But I think that in terms of like the political landscape, it has changed completely in such a short space of time. I think that it's something that in a lot of ways it just seems to be kind of a constant source of more upheaval, and with it creates, I think, some space for planning for the future. I think that the constitutional question for not only Northern Ireland but even Scotland kind of keeps rumbling through as well. So I think it's a new political landscape, just in terms of, I think, how countries want to move forward, whether they want to have independent kind of views or be part of more collective groups, I think is kind of almost been the norm for so long that it does seem to be cropping up more and more. That might be kind of something that might happen in the near future here, that there might be a border poll. But I think that as well, it definitely, as you can kind of see across media and everything else, whenever there are more negotiations to be made, it does again spark different outbursts of violence here as well. So I think that it's something that is quite worrying in a way whenever you do see the kind of visceral impact of the day-to-day outworkings of violence still coming through. But again, in a way, it definitely is on a much smaller scale compared to the past as well. So it's quite a complicated area that I can't admit I'm a massive expert in either. But I think that it's something that, yeah, a lot of people just have had to come to grips with in a place where the majority of the people here didn't vote
Didn't
that
want it in the
way
first
for
place.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you don't have to. I don't think you have to be an expert in it, Emma, in order to have an opinion on it, because it is your reality every single day. And I suppose that's the contribution we want from you today, is to hear how that does impact on you. It's one thing hearing a news story as to how things are developing, but it's a completely different thing to try and live that reality every single day. Rachel, as Emma was speaking there, I saw you nodding along. Undoubtedly, Brexit is having an impact on life in Northern Ireland, on life in the United Kingdom. What are your thoughts on the legacy, I suppose, of the Good Friday Agreement in terms of Brexit?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll provide a bit of background thoughts too, and then address that question. I think Emma, you might have mentioned this, or I'll build off of it. I think Brexit is not the first instance of political impasse. I think since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, it's been a really consistent trend, and there's been a lot more negotiations needed. And I think especially since 2017 too, there's been somewhat of a fresh round of political instability additionally. I remember when I was in Northern Ireland in 2018, and so when I was studying there, a lot of what we talked about was the political tension around the shutdown around Stromsta and everything like that. And so I think my main point with that is that Brexit is a really unexpected test. I don't think anyone could have expected that it might reignite some of the original most controversial issues of the Good Friday Agreement, such as the border. I think the border with the Republic is a key issue coming out of this, and the discussions of keeping it open and otherwise, and the trade arrangements. And so I think it's really reigniting a lot of division. I remember I read recently that there was some funding, specialized funding until 2027. So I think under the Brexit agreement for Northern Ireland, in terms of having more flexible funding policy or something around that, and I think that is kind of prevalent to the some of the economic issues this might be continuing to create, which will hit young people hardest too.
A lot of EU funding has been lost because of Brexit and the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. And I suppose, Kevin, in terms of international diplomacy, this is something you're interested in. And I suppose I'm very impressed, Rachel, that you got through your points there, and not once did you mention the backstop or the protocol. Well done, you. These are words and terms we have become very accustomed to over the last couple of years. But has Brexit, Kevin, in your opinion, perhaps given the EU a bigger role in the future of Northern Ireland?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Good Friday Agreement was put in place under the assumption that both parties would be part of the European Union. That was a fundamental sticking point in it. It was, at the time, one of the few borders the only border within the European Union, between North and South. And so there was a need, or it was seen as a need, that would continue. I mean, the North of Ireland is outside of the European Union and outside of the rest of Ireland, but at the same time, the North and the South remain key trading partners of each other. I suppose in certain parties in the North, we're talking about hard borders, particularly the DUP joined with the coalition with Theresa May 2019. They were pushing for a hard Brexit. And yes, you even see farmers. I'm from a farming community myself, and the amount of trade, agribusiness that goes north and south to creameries up north, to cheese processors, even at the fundamental level. And then, of course, you have the EU itself. The EU doesn't want peace to break down at any point in the EU. At the moment, it's working in the Balkans to retain peace, and also working in Northern Ireland to keep the peace process stable there through trade. It does feel, now that I'm saying that out loud, that it is a small bit of deja vu. We're still talking about the Balkans and Northern Ireland 25 years on, but at the same time, the EU is the largest single market. It does have a role to play, and because it's the south of Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland is in the EU, it remains a key player when it comes to the North of Ireland and the trade with the North of Ireland.
25 years on the Balkans and Northern Ireland, Kevin, you could argue maybe 100 years that we're still talking about both places, and conflict in both places as well. Ryan, did you want to come in on that and the effects of Brexit on peace, on the peace process in Northern Ireland, and the legacy of the Good Friday Agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were a few things that few conditions, few relationships that were really critical to sort of securing the agreement and then getting the new political institutions up and running after 1998. And one of those, as we've talked about, was the American dimension, with Mitchell, and then the special envoys as well. But also critically important was the relationship between the British and the Irish governments. And for that, that 15 years or so after the signing of the agreement, and the two governments had a very good working relationship with each other. And I think that's part of the reason why in that period the assembly got up and running for the first time. The paramilitaries decommissioned their weapons. The parties, the police service was reformed, and the parties accepted it as legitimate. And I think, but as to Rachel's good point earlier, there were certainly political impasses before Brexit, but in the aftermath of Brexit, and as the British government has increasingly acted on its own, that's put a lot of strain on the relationship with the Irish government. From someone I was speaking to, spoke to recently, I learned that sort of even throughout this period, the two governments still had a decent working relationship at the technical level, at the the level of the civil services, but it was really at the high political level that we saw a lot of the strain, and it was ultimately that high political level that mattered, and still matters quite a lot to the peace process and the implementation of the agreement. Things seem to be moving in the right direction. Relations seem to be getting slowly getting better, but we'll see whether that continues or not over the next few years.
Well, there's no doubt about it, but relationships have been very, very strained over the last number of years. Some might argue, particularly since Brexit, as a few of you have also argued, it went way before that as well. And Brexit possibly only exacerbated matters. But the current political impasse, as we see it, Emma, I'm just interested in your capacity as the student union president in Queen's. What are you hearing from your peers about politics, about political impasse, about voting, about being involved, about exercising their democratic right?
Yeah, I think that, and again, definitely worth noting the kind of fact that, again, the executive has been on more of a break than actually sitting as a whole since the 25 years. There's kind of been really large gaps before, but I think that especially the kind of current refusal to sit and join as a party, and kind of all collectively work together as politicians, it does kind of have an effect. I'd say the kind of recent council elections, there were some areas that were only kind of getting about 52 odd % of turnout, which obviously there's kind of a decline with local council elections in other years as well. But I think that it does reflect the fact that for many people it's kind of seen as pointless in a way at this stage.
Apathy,
yeah, there is just that sense of, I don't want to get involved in politics because I won't be able to do anything, because the kind of functions that are there are not working as they should be. And even though obviously Belfast City Council and the other councils across the counties are able to meet and do some sort of work together, as they're still kind of meeting, it's the kind of level where the cost of living crisis has had such a massive impact in terms of students and student support. Between the Students' Union and the University in Queen's, we've been able to put together a cost of living package of just under about £8 million, compared to the government at the time is kind of only doing specific payments for people that are already on the benefit system, which again kind of cuts out a lot of students, young people. those in that kind of gap that I feel that exists now of people that don't necessarily qualify for benefits, but definitely feel the effects of cost of living. So I just think that it's one of those things where it's having such a daily direct impact on people's lives that it's hard for them to not feel that frustration towards the systems that just clearly are designed to be rewritten as well. I think that it's the fact that the Good Friday Agreement was written, and it was kind of expected by the civil service at the time for these effects to happen, for impasses to be reached whenever you have to have that mandatory agreement from both sides. But I think that it's something that should therefore have that kind of, temptation to come back and do some work again, especially with the development of parties that don't align to either kind of
but
side
the
of
alliance,
that.
the rise of alliance in the middle ground. Well, let's bring Kevin in, because that's exactly what Kevin wants to talk about. And I suppose for context, for anyone who's maybe not across it, I think it was a 54% turnout at the most recent election. Sinn Féin, Nationalist or Republican Party, now hold most seats in local councils, and that means it's the Nationalist majority for the first time ever. But this middle ground is on the rise, and that's the Alliance Party. They're gaining and gaining with people who don't maybe identify themselves as nationalist or unionist. And Alliance have been putting forward the argument that the systems of power sharing need to change in light of both the DUP and Sinn Féin choosing to leave government and collapsing institutions in the last number of years. So, Kevin, what were your thoughts on this?
I suppose, even to further that point with the census that was recently carried out, the increase in people who consider themselves to be Northern Irish, who don't consider themselves to be unionists, or maybe soft unionists with a small u, and don't consider themselves to be nationalists either. These people who just want to live in the north of Ireland and to go about their daily business with their trains working on time, with their institutions working. And the Alliance Party, given the fact that it's not an unrealistic assumption that it could at some point be the second largest party within Northern Ireland, due to the frustrations on, as you said, both Sinn Féin voters and DUP voters, moving to either side into the Alliance Party's middle ground. There has been talks in recent months, definitely since the last elections, that perhaps there should be a change, that the alliance should be allowed into the Stormed Assembly, First Minister, Deputy First Minister system, because currently, of course, it's the biggest party and then the second biggest demographic, and the Alliance Party, by its very definition, is a neutral ground and therefore doesn't fit into the demographic change, which was necessary at the time, but we are in a different stage of Northern Ireland's growth at the moment.
So would you agree with the Alliance Party that the system should be changed?
I would say that you need consideration for these things. The minute you say that these things shouldn't be considered is the minute that things just break down even further. Look, there are certain people, there are a large minority of people in Northern Ireland who are voting for the Alliance Party, and the fact that their vote their vote doesn't get put into the First Minister, Deputy First Minister race, it does feel unfortunate.
Thoughts of the rest of our panelists? Anyone have any opinions on that they'd like to offer? No, happy enough to move on. Well, Rachel, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. I can comment a bit on the kind of political apathy component as well. I think that was brought up a bit back. I think additionally, it really comes down to a lot of the political impasses around these key contentious issues creating also like distrust with citizens too, of not wanting to participate in the democratic process, whether that's intended or not. I think it, especially with young people who are most impacted by economic issues, I think adding on to that, it seems like there's been increased polarization too at the political level around, and I'm going to mention the protocol now because I didn't before, around the Northern Ireland Protocol, and some of the backlash that's been sparked around that, and how that's directly connected to, I believe, the riots in Belfast in 2021 and other instances of resurgence. So I think the process is becoming increasingly difficult, though there's a history of political impasse. I think the tensions and the stakes are rising with Brexit and other aspects. And I think also to the point about the previous parliamentary elections too, I think that really stoked a big impasse with deep divisions as well, with the DUP and Sinn Féin and other potential major parties. So I'm wondering too, with the establishment of the Windsor framework and otherwise, how that will come into play with these dynamics, and whether there'll be potential for dialogue moving forward as it becomes a bit more contentious.
And just to pick up on something you said there about tensions rising and that, spilling out onto the streets with conflict and rioting, as we saw a couple of summers ago, who is in the position to stop that happening? Who can help those people with their frustrations? Who can help those who are dissatisfied and unhappy with how things are proceeding? Rachel, did you want to pick up on that, or anybody? Does anyone have?
Sorry, I cut out for a minute due to internet, I believe. Would you mind repeating the question, please?
It was no problem. It was just in respect of the comment you meant about you mentioned about tensions rising.
Yeah.
And how sometimes that spills into the streets and rioting happens, as we saw 2 summers ago in 2021. Okay. Who can help with that situation? Who can help to ease those tensions, to calm the situation, and who should be a little more active in doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks for bringing that up too, and orienting towards the future. I think, and these are my own opinions based on my experience and also kind of reading more recently about some of the political developments. I think with any ongoing peace process, it requires commitment at all levels. So it seems lately and at the community level, there's been a lot of commitment to grassroots peace building and reconciliation through various different groups, storytelling, addressing healing, which I think has been super helpful, and also due to the funding, there might be limitations, but I think that's also a microcosm of building peace at the grassroots level too. But I think a real long-term solution also requires political action, and so it's challenging to put the responsibility on necessarily one type of actor, because I think for any effective peace process, it needs to be at all levels. And I think it's really challenging with the political impasses. And I think more dialogue is definitely needed, and more mechanisms at that level too. Because I think civil society a lot has worked in reconciliation to fill the gaps and on some of the social economic issues. But unfortunately, there are a lot of limitations with funding too. So I think it has to be a joint process and a collaborative effort between all levels.
Yeah, Kevin.
Sorry, yeah, it's just some points that I'd like to bring up on civil society. Since there is a lot of breakdown since the Good Friday Agreements, institutions, it's been off more often than it has been on. There has been, I know there's been a movement to crush the Quangos that were in charge in Northern Ireland because of political discourse or political disagreements during the 60s, 70s, 80s, during the Troubles. But there has been a rise, certainly listening to my cousins up in the north of Ireland, there's been a rise of private companies setting up stuff. So for example, in the south, we have councils coming around and they put up the Wi-Fi boxes outside the houses on the telephone poles. But I was talking to my cousins up in the north, and that has been done by private companies, contractors. And it seems to me that the situation in Northern Ireland seemed to, well, they're used to Stormont being down, so they might as well work away through other means, you know. And it's unfortunate because, you know, private corporations, you know, the Americans perhaps know more about this than I do, but we shouldn't keep our public stuff into the hands of the private corporations as well.
Well, I think possibly our retort for that argument would be that people have exercised their right to vote. They've voted politicians into office, and they want them to work for them and to provide a better society. And the impasse, as Emma was saying earlier on, is causing so much frustration. Yes, there's an element of get on with it, but there's only so much that you can do. And Rachel also talked about the constraints on the amount of work that can be done without political action. And really, really interesting points that you all bring up. Rachel, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to touch a bit more specifically, I think, on I think it's really important to provide support and opportunity for women's political activists and leaders, especially though there have been progress and improvements over the past 25 years since the signing, given during the peace process, the representation of women was a lot less substantial, despite them being very vital parts of the peace process at the top level. At the top level, as I mentioned, the key negotiators of Mo Mullen as the Secretary of State, and then the Women's Coalition made a big difference. But after the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition was suspended as well, there's been kind of at the more grassroots level a movement towards getting women more involved in politics and using that as a starting point additionally. And I think due to that, women are in a position to potentially more innovatively reach beyond the political aisles too. So I think it's important that there are opportunities for women created.
And are you saying for women to go into mainstream political life, or are you talking about the work that's done at the grassroots level by women's groups? And I know that arguments are being made constantly that funding should be ring-fenced, particularly for the work of women's groups, because of that contribution and the very contribution you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. So I was actually arguing for both. I think at both levels, historically, there's been a unique set of challenges that really brave women face, such as more public scrutiny, or in some cases, even risk to safety when they're on in political leadership as well, and engaging in peace building. And so I would definitely argue for more women being provided the resources and the support needed to get involved as leaders at the political and the grassroots levels additionally.
Does anyone else want to come in on that? There were a few heads nodding along as Rachel was speaking there. Anyone else want to make a comment on women's participation in politics and how important that is?
I mean, there's definitely everyone should it's their nation, it's their part of the world. They definitely should be involved in the discourse. I mean, by not having them involved in the discourse, you're automatically omitting 50 to 51% of the population. You know, there is no harm by people, by women or other people talking, you know, and women's groups have a large role to play on the political level, on the social level. Yeah, definitely.
Emma, I sensed you wanted to come in there, did you?
Yeah, just I think that it's something that can't be emphasized enough. I think that again, kind of drawing it back to the Good Friday Agreement, I think that in terms of peace negotiations, I think that when women are part of the process, they're statistically more likely to be successful in terms of conflict. So it's that kind of level at that specifically focusing on peace. But then in terms of, again, coming back to the last kind of council elections, there were some areas of Northern Ireland that there were such few women candidates being put forward at that level of local politics. And I think that when you can't see other people, other women stepping forward, it just deters other people. I know of different organizations such as 50/50 NI and different groups that are trying to champion women getting more involved in civic life, political life. But I think that, again, not just in Northern Ireland, but globally, there's so many more barriers put up there for women. I think that, especially in an era of social media, the level of scrutiny, threats to safety, it's just on the increase in a really disturbing way. So I think that, again, it's just something that it's kind of a sad state of affairs that women have to be so conscious of it to put themselves forward for the same role as men. But I think that it's something that needs to be addressed, because without women's voices in politics, it's just a much more
I'm just going to ask you one more question, Emma. It's a personal one, and just to give our other panelists a little bit of warning, we're coming to the end of our discussion. So, have a think about your thoughts on how you look forward. That just how you look to the future up in the next 25 years. And you can, if you dare, make forecasts as well. But just on the subject of women being involved in politics, I suppose you're involved in politics with a small p, Emma, being involved in the student union political arena. So I wondered why you wanted to get involved and why you wanted to, you took on the role as president.
Yeah, so it's I feel like student politics is almost, in a way, especially within Belfast and Northern Ireland, almost the kind of breeding ground for politics with a big P. There's quite a few MLAs that have kind of come up through our student council, which is not surprising. I think that it kind of reflects how society has moved on in terms of, I think that student politics these days is much more focused on the issues that students are facing in terms of welfare, mental health, and all of those kind of big societal issues. And I think that a lot of the kind of like the identity politics of backgrounds and religion has kind of died away in a way, which I think is kind of positive in that it's reflecting the society that young people want to engage in and want to get involved in. But yeah, I think my background was more volunteering, coming through clubs and societies and things like that. And then I was the education officer last year. So it was just kind of like all of these different steps adding up to then getting involved as president. But I think that it's given me just such a wealth of expertise in terms of the different areas that I could get involved in the future. Like I would like to get involved in politics or policy or community work in the future.
So in terms of that then, Emma, when you think about how much has changed in the last 25 years, and here we are now with yes, you have nationalism and you have unionism, but you have the alliance in the middle. Do you see that political landscape changing again in the next 25 years, where people like you who are totally dealing in issues will be to the forefront of political life here?
I'm really hopeful for it. I think just in terms of progressiveness, I think that it's something that I would love to see and love to maybe be a part of in some sort of way. Who knows? But I think that in terms of the issues that matter to young people now, they are different than their parents' generations, their grandparents' generations. I think that whenever you see, again, the likes of census data of how there is a growing younger population and the kind of ways that they want to engage in politics. I think that it's through issues that matter to them that causes them to get more involved in democracy. And I think that once political parties here truly start to understand that, then that's where I hope that there might be more engagement in the future whenever young people here are seeing issues that matter to them being at the forefront instead of issues that were talked about the same way 25 years ago. So yeah.
So you're painting a hopeful picture as you look forward to the next 25 years there, Emma. Ryan, we haven't heard from you in a while. You've been sitting there, you have been nodding along. What are your thoughts then, listening to the rest of the discussion, and as we approach the end now, looking forward to the next 25 years of on from the Good Friday Agreement? How will we be commemorating the 50th anniversary, do you think?
Hard to say how we'll be doing that, but no, something I was thinking about something Rachel brought up earlier about Mo Mallum and her time as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and sort of how important she was, especially to the rights and equality provisions in the Good Friday Agreement. And so I think she is a very good example. Her involvement in the peace process is a very good example of something that sounds very basic, but is very important, and that's the political will, the political leadership of the parties involved in peace negotiations, peace processes, is really important, whether that's in Northern Ireland or elsewhere. And so I think looking ahead, much of I don't know how things will unfold, but I think much of it will depend on the sort of the leadership and the will of whoever is whoever is in power, whether that's in Britain, Ireland, the United States, even. And so yeah, I think it's. And then, of course, with the inevitable question of border poll and questions about reunification. Again, I don't know how those will pan out. I don't know when, if or when the British Secretary of State would call a border poll, call for one to be held. But again, much of it will depend on sort of who is in power at the time.
Okay, well, we will see. I feel like we could do a whole other discussion on the border poll, because there's so much discussion at the minute, or it's been mentioned an awful lot at present. Kevin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, down the Republic, there's always a conversation about the border poll, about the future of Northern Ireland, etc. But in my head, in my opinion, it doesn't matter if there's a border poll. It doesn't matter if there's whatever it does to come in 25 years. What is most important is, sorry, something fell there. What's most important is talking, dialogue. Again, my field that I want to go into is diplomacy, and the whole strength of that is talking. It's, if you don't talk with your other party, if you see them as the absolute evil, then regardless of what side you are, then nothing's going to, no bridge is going to be built, no society won't move forward. You need to keep talking with people. The politics is the art of talking with people who disagree with you and who you disagree with. That'd be my understanding of it.
I'd see you involved in negotiations in the next 25 years, Kevin, by the signs of it. And Rachel, last word to you then. How do you look to the future?
Yeah, so I wanted to build off Kevin's really good point about dialogue being important. I think the outcome of the 25 years into the future will be directly dependent not only on dialogue between parties and the government and otherwise, but I also think it's about strategically thinking about consensus building and how what areas they might be able to build slow progress on that might be less contentious to get the government back up and running otherwise, and then focusing on more contentious issues in that process. So I think a lot of it is around the dialogue, but also reigniting the mindset of a shared future too, additionally, given some of the recent tensions. I also think for the next 25 years, I think it's absolutely critical for young people to, when Emma was talking about like political apathy and otherwise, I think it's really important for young people to build coalitions and towards the importance of participating in an advocacy towards democracy, because I think elections are a pivotal point where young people can give voice to the leadership that matters to them, and advocacy can be around priorities that matter most. And I think that will help completely build peace as well. And I also think related to that, talking about students a bit, I think that while the education system is still incredibly divided, I think based on my own experience working with Children in Crossfire, which was inspired by the true story of Richard Moore, as well in his experience in the conflict, in being blinded by a rubber bullet, and his advocacy going forward afterwards. He's really been able to, him and other leaders have really been able to change the perception of reconciliation and dedicate their life to working towards a shared future. And I think the global education and educating the heart methodology is a direct linkage to that additionally. And I think you can really see the work of these community organizations, especially I think in the educating the heart and global citizenship workshops, as building towards a shared future, focusing on global issues. But I think in reflection, students can also, and this is just from my own experience, students can also reflect on local issues too. I think when that mindset of global citizenship is taught about and in curriculums more like as well. And I think there are lessons additionally that Northern Ireland and the peace process has for other contexts that I'm happy to talk about if there's time, but don't need to.
I think we're just out of time, Rachel. But it is interesting that you say that there's an awful lot to learn from the experience of Northern Ireland over the last 25 years for other countries. But I have to say thank you very much to all four of you. That was a really interesting discussion, and thanks very much for your contributions. Ryan Connor, Emma Murphy, Kevin O'Connor, and Rachel Stromsta. Thank you very much. Full of us. Round of applause for you all. Takeaways from that conversation for me. I was just writing down notes as we were going along there, the importance of funding for community work, legacy, and fulfilling and implementing the human rights provisions in the Good Friday Agreement. Irish American lobby, is it as powerful as it once was? That'll be interesting to watch going forward. Brexit, the unexpected test, was put in a very good way there. Young people get involved, long-term solutions, need political action. And finally, Kevin's words, just keep talking. As Rachel says, dialogue is the only way forward. Thank you very much to all four of you. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the discussion today as well. I hope you've really enjoyed it. I know I have. A reminder that tomorrow, same time, same place, will be a discussion about reproductive rights across the island of Ireland and the US as well. Thanks very much for your participation today. And from me, Lynette Fay, goodbye. Ahoy.